marketers. And when you add to that the fact that you have less than 7 seconds to catch attention, it's really a challenge. How do you do that? What does it take to actually get people's attention and then keep it? And one of the reasons this has become so important is that the buying process is now flipped. Buyers are spending 70% of their time with marketing content and each other, talking about everything, learning what they need to know. So they're not bringing salespeople in until the end of the equation. So the age at which marketing was done by generating leads and then giving them to sales to establish that relationship and carry it through the entire buying process, those days are over. We're now responsible for the bulk of the buying process. And that means we need to develop really terrific content marketing skills in order to accomplish this. And the other thing that research is starting to find is that lack of relevant content can lower huge. Some other research that's been done has found that 48% of buyers have said, hey, if the quality of thought leadership content improves, it would influence their purchase decision. Okay, recent research from IDG has found that 33% of buyers they speak to say that content is not useful, and about the same percentage say it's not relevant either. So same relevance, usefulness, I'm not sure quite what the difference is. They're both kind of the same thing, but that's a majority of buyers saying that they need better content. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we all encounter in our daily lives is the fact that there is so much content available. Next slide, Ron.
Just a moment, artist.
It's really kind of like taking a drink from a fire, and it's not just your buyers, it's you. Think about what you go through.
Artist, there's a problem with the audio. Attendees are saying that you're cutting in and out. Hello?
Okay, should I call in?
Yes. We appreciate your patience, everyone, while we resolve this issue with the audio. Thank you very much. Artist, are you there?
Can you hear me? Yes, I am.
Okay, great. How is that? If you'll keep talking, I'm sure everyone will let me know whether or not they can hear you okay or not. So let's continue.
Okay. Okay. I believe I was at the point. Thank you for bearing with me. Really, I appreciate it. And sorry for the difficulties. I was talking about this idea that there's just so much information. All of us encounter that every single day. And your buyers are much the same. In fact, research from IDG Connect has also found that buyers spend 56% of their time either searching for content or interacting and engaging with content. So that's, a majority of the time during their buying process is spent with content and searching for it. And it's really become a challenge to rise above the noise and the clutter out there. There's just so much content. The ability for us to become publishers and put content out online and make it available through a variety of channels has really kind of mucked up the works, if you will. There's just so much of it, and a lot of it is saying the same things. So your buyers get into this quandary about, who do I believe, which content should I trust, which is the right information, and those kinds of things. We have to work really hard when we're creating content to prove that we're trustworthy, that we're credible, that we are experts in the fields that we serve, the industries that we serve, and that's really created a challenge where we have to really develop our skill sets for content in order to overcome that. Next slide, please. And so what happens with all this information that's available online is that it becomes kind of a game of concentration. Now, I'm aging myself here, but when I was a kid, we used to play concentration, and it's where you put, there's pairs of everything, right, and they're hidden. And you have to go out and figure out which card you would turn over would match another card somewhere else. So you have to get really good at remembering where things are in order to win this game. And it's kind of similar to what we're all going through online, especially your buyers. They may come across something and not realize or not remember to bookmark it, or they may not remember where they saw something, and then 2 days later they need that information. And so what we need to do is really make it easy for people to find the information, for them to keep track of the information, and we do that with RSS feeds, and we do it with newsletter programs, opt-in programs for content, all those different kinds of things. We also do it by establishing presence on social media where they can follow us and keep abreast of our information. So we have to be really conscious about, even though we create the content and we put it out there, will they find it? It's kind of like if a tree falls in the woods, does anyone hear it? Well, we have to make sure that people hear, and that they can find what they're looking for. Next slide, please. So what we're going to talk about today, we're going to go through 5 tips that I think are really key for how we go about starting to engage at the beginning of the buying process and really attracting attention and engaging our buyers throughout the process, keeping that attention. So tip 1 is get to know your buyers. Next slide, please. And I say this in all earnestness, you really, really have to get to know your buyers. So what I'm going to show you here is a comparison, okay, of 2 different buyers and why this is so important. So I want you to meet Harry. Harry is the VP of Sales. Harry has been a salesperson for a very long time. And Harry's priorities are, of course, ramping sales reps quickly, closing more sales, driving revenues. He's all about, getting customers on board, making money for the company because that's what runs the company. And so those are his key priorities. Next slide, please. Now, I want you to, and this is a very brief overview, of course, but I want you to meet Diane. Diane is the VP of Customer Service, and so, or Customer Experience. And so her main goal is to keep customer satisfaction high, to establish loyalty, right, to retain customers, okay? So she has different goals than Harry. Now, if you create a piece of content and you send it to both Diane and Harry, what's going to happen? Well, you're either going to meet the goals or the interest of one of them, or your content is going to be so broad that it doesn't interest either of them because you're trying to cover too much and be all things to all people with one content asset. And that just doesn't work anymore. People don't have time. Remember on that first slide, you have 7 seconds to get attention. It's going to be really hard to get both Harry's attention and Diane's attention in 7 seconds, okay, because their priorities are different. The way they think is different. The situations that they are dealing with today are different. Even if they're both dealing with the same situation, they're going to be looking at it differently because their end goals are slightly different, right? So they come at it from different angles. Next slide, please. So you really have to take the time to dig into Harry and Diane and figure out what's really going to make them tick. But in order to do that, here's tip 2. You've got to understand status quo and what status quo is. Next slide, please. So let's just go through a level set on status quo so that we're all on the same page. So status quo is really your prospect's current situation, okay? They haven't recognized a problem that's worth solving yet. And most of the reason why they haven't done that, or they aren't really down the trail at the beginning stages, is because they've got a workaround. Their workaround is doing just fine. Thank you so much. Quit bothering me. And if it wasn't working, they would be out there actively searching for a solution. Okay, but in a true early stage, in status quo, before they have decided that the problem is worth solving, they're not looking. So you have to figure out, why should they care? Why should they care about whatever content you provide? What will it address that will make them sit up and go, oh, wait a minute, I hadn't thought of that? How are you going to get their attention in that first 7 seconds? So when we're talking about early stage buying, this is the situation, right? They're not out there spending time searching for your content. They haven't decided that either the problem is severe enough to solve, or they haven't recognized what they're losing by not solving the problem. So you really have to work hard to get their attention, and even harder to keep it. And that 7 seconds, is a big deal. You have to really think about the beginning of content. There's a lot of content out there that kind of rambles along, and then, in the third paragraph, there's the hook. Well, they're not going to make it that far. You've got to get your hooks up front. Okay? Next slide, please. So what we're going to talk about now is tip 3 is segmentation, and I really want you to think about this, because this is very, very critical. So you've gotten to know your buyers. You've figured out how their interests vary, how they approach their priorities. You've assessed their status quo. You've figured all this out, and then you need to segment your audiences. Now, next slide, please. There are a number of ways to segment your audience, and probably most of you, what you hear the most is you have to do personas. Everybody needs personas. And I agree. I think personas are great. But here's the thing. I work with a lot of companies that just don't have the resources or the manpower or whatever to develop all the personas they need to really do this, well. And so maybe they can pick a persona or 2 and work on that, but sometimes that's even too much. And so you want to think about the different ways you can segment, and how can you be most effective based on whatever it is that you're selling, your product, your service, your solution. So you can think about it from different angles. So the first angle would be, what's the problem that your solution solves, right? And who's dealing with that problem? Just focus on, how do you create content that addresses the problem and its importance and why solve it. You may not be able to get down to the role or the title level or the persona, but you've got to start thinking about different ways to get your content more laser focused, okay, to hone in on things. You can talk about the solution. What does your product enable? And you can tie that back into who you've identified as your buyers. Personas are great because they allow you to get really close to your buyers. You get to know quite a bit about them. And a lot of persona projects that I work on, we create whole storylines about them, give them pictures, name them, and look at not only their professional aspirations and their company's aspirations, but, try to get a little more personal. And the beauty of all of this is, for those of you who think you can't do personas, social media. You can find out so much about people like your buyers. If you have a specific contact list, you can even find out about your exact buyers. In fact, I have a client right now who sells only to really, really big companies, and the list is pretty short, so we're really digging in and learning about specific buyers. But I mean, you can spend a little time and learn enough about your buyers to get more personal. The other option available to you is vertical. I mean, somebody in financial services, for example, will speak about their their problem differently than somebody in utilities, or whatever. But look at your different verticals. I mean, if you're in the education space, the way you write your content is going to be different than if you're writing to a banker. So you can really segment your content that way and make it at least industry specific. And buyers have indicated that at least if you get to the industry specific part, you could get their interest. Next slide, please. But one of the things I really want you to consider the most is the benefits of, back one, please, the benefits of segmentation. And there are benefits for you, and there are benefits for your buyers. So for you, you're going to get higher attention because you're targeting your content, right? So people are going to pay more attention to you, and that's what you need. Without attention, you're not going anywhere. You're going to get increased credibility because they pay attention. If they pay attention, they find something worthwhile. And so your credibility will increase along with their level of attention. Because they're paying attention and you're going to build your content in a storyline that creates momentum and drives them forward towards purchase, you're going to be shortening sales cycle times, right? Shortening their buyer time. And buyers indicate they want shorter buying cycles. The problem that they say they have is that there's not enough great content to help them learn what they need to know to buy. That was revealed by also IDT Connect research in a webinar last week. You're going to have lower attrition to your database. You'll have less, what that means is less lead leakage, you know, because people will stay engaged with your content. Now look at it from the buyer's perspective. They're going to get more relevant content, which is something they say they desperately want. They're going to find value in it because your content is going to offer them useful information, ideas that they can apply to their thinking or even to, you know, dealing with a problem right now as they think about buying your solution in order to totally deal with the problem. You know, they're going to have less effort finding content they need because they know when you send them something or when they come across something that you've developed, it's going to be worth their while to read. And they're going to get applicable knowledge to you, from you. So for buyers, segmentation is critical. For you, segmentation is critical. There are benefits on both sides. And I thought this was a really interesting quote that if we apply our online marketing to B2B target segments, we can actually produce 50% more qualified leads than we could if we don't segment. So it just goes to show you how really important it is in this day and age to engage your buyers. Next slide, please. Now, tip 4, we're going to establish a content foundation. And next slide, please. And what I mean by this is we need to understand all the different things our content needs to do in order for us to build content that is going to engage these early stage buyers. One of the things that I want you to think about is that in digital marketing, in this age of so much information available and accessible online, content is actually the currency with which you're able to buy attention. Okay, so if you notice that your marketing content will be considered as valuable as your buyers perceive it to be relevant and to provide recognizable value. Okay, and what we want with this content currency, we want to buy our buyers' attention, and we want them to pay us back by taking action. You know, so we want attention and action. They want relevance and value. So it should be a mutually beneficial exchange, right, from both sides. So we need to start thinking about how valuable is our content. Would somebody actually pay you for it? You know, I mean, so we've got to think about it that way. It's not just putting out a piece of content. It's content that's going to establish something that's worth something to the people that you're sharing it with. Next slide, please. So once we realize how much is at stake with the content that we're developing, you know, we want to think about how can we increase our level of thought leadership. And to give you a level set, I just want you to understand that thought leadership is all about helping buyers to understand issues they have to address and what kinds of innovations are available for them to achieve their business objectives, okay? So what I want you to get is thought leadership is not about a format. You know, a lot of people think, or a lot of companies think, that if they keep producing white papers, they're rich in thought leadership. Well, there are a lot of crappy white papers out there. You know, just because it's a white paper does not mean it is thought leadership, okay? So we have to consider that the value of the thought leadership that we can create is completely indicative of how well our expertise matches our buyers' visions, okay, and their priorities. How well do we match up with that? How much better off are they going to be with our information and our expertise than they would be buying from the guy down the street? So the trick with this thought leadership thing is to be professional and credible without becoming overly academic or dry or preachy or trying to sell anything. You know, a lot of white papers, the last 2 or 3 pages are about the solution, right? Because we say, okay, we shared our ideas, now we're going to sell you something. Thought leadership does not sell products, Okay, so leadership sells ideas. So we need to think about it from that perspective. Next slide, please. Now, when you're creating a content foundation, you need to understand what the goals are that your content must achieve. Okay, and there are 5 things that I think are really, really key that we need to think about when we're sitting down to plan out and develop content for the early stages. We need to convey a sense of urgency. You know, quite frankly, if it's interesting, fine. You know, how many times have you seen something come through your email or whatever, and you thought, geez, that's interesting, so you bookmark it or you save it to a file to read later or whatever. How many times do you go back and read it? Probably not. I have a file full of stuff I've never gone back and read because I figure when I'm ready, there's new information available online. At the rate of publishing, why would I want to go back and read something that I saved 6 months ago when I can find something new and up to date, right? I mean, that's how we think today. So if it's not urgent for them to read your content, if there isn't something that grabs them right now, it's not urgent enough for them to deal with, they're probably not going to go back and read it later. This is the other reason why getting to know your buyers really well is so important. Because if you can't hit on something that's urgent for them, then, you know, it's not going to work. So the next thing it needs to do is present some kind of impact. So what are they going to learn? What valuable idea are they going to get? How are they going to understand the difference that's possible in working with you versus working with some other vendor? You know, what is the impact for them professionally? For them, if they're, you know, is it going to enhance their career if they solve this problem? What are they going to get personally? Just because they're a B2B buyer, we tend to think about the company, what the company is going to benefit from. We also need to think about what is our buyer going to get? You know, where are they in their career? Where might they like to be? Is this going to impact any of that? Is there a way to present that within the content so they can think, I can solve this objective for my company and I can achieve X for myself? What is that thing? You know, and the third thing we need to really think about is how we can simplify effort. Now, a lot of us need to generate leads, right? So we want to put our content behind a gate. We want them to fill out a form. If we're going to do that, we need to make it a darn short form. But the other thing about effort is that it goes beyond just how easy it is for them to access the content. You need to think about how easy is it for them to understand the content. That's a different kind of effort, right? Are they going to read, you know, I always laugh when I get to this point where I realize I'm reading a piece of content and I've read the same paragraph like 3 times and I still don't know what it says, right? And I haven't even realized I've been reading it 3 times until I stop and go, wait a minute, I'm not getting anywhere. You know, there's a lot of content like that out there. We need to take special care to make sure that it makes sense and that it's easy to understand. We're all going a million miles a minute, right? And so we're in scan mode most of the time. You know, how many times do you kind of scan something, get the gist, and move on? We need to make sure that it's that simple for them to get an idea that grabs them so they say, oh, wait a minute, I need to stop and back up and actually read this. It's important to me. So think about that when you're thinking about how you can simplify effort. And then we want to be transparent. You know, you need to be really clear about your intentions and what you want from them. If they think you're trying to sell them something instead of share information that's valuable, they're going to lose interest. You know, so we need to be really transparent and really show them we're trying to help them. We're trying to educate them. Okay, so just think about that. And a lot of times what happens is we're so used to writing about our companies and our products and all of that kind of thing that we can slip back into that company speak, you know, and start pushing our solutions without even realizing it. So, you know, one of the ways I deal with that is read content out loud. And I can tell as soon as, you know, something veers off track a little bit and I can go, wait a minute, what am I talking about? You know, but really think about what you're putting in your content and how you're talking about it. And then make sure you deliver takeaways. Takeaways are what I define as a key idea, a nugget, something of value that's going to stick with your buyer. Okay, whether it's a call to action to go do something else, that's hugely critical. But also, are you sharing ideas with them in a way that helps them visualize what it would be like to solve the problem, or in a way that has them, you know, stop their colleague in the hallway and say, hey, Stan, did you know, blah, 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 you know, or have you even thought about this or that? What you really want to do is share 4 ideas that they can go have conversations with, right? That's how you get your ideas in the room. Next slide, please. So now that I have overwhelmed you with what your content goals are, I want to talk about how they match up with what your buyers need. With what your buyers need. Sorry, your buyers need education. I mean, I'm aging myself again with the picture of chutes and ladders, but this is kind of the crazy way that buying happens, right? You learn something, then you slide down to go find information, answer another question, climb back up the ladder, get more information. They need education. They need a lot of it. And when you consider the fact that most of your buyers don't solve this problem every day, especially if you're selling a B2B complex high-dollar product or solution, they don't buy one of those every day. So chances are that if they have solved the problem before, everything has changed since then, right? The technology's evolved, or the solution has evolved, or their service is presented differently, or there's more options. What do they need to know? And we have to share more education. Remember at the beginning I told you that information or research has revealed that buyers say there's just not enough educational content. And here's the thing about education. The more we know about how to solve a problem, or the more your buyer knows, the more confident they're going to become, because they become more sure of themselves. If they're not confident, they're certainly not going to make a buying decision that puts their neck on the line. So the value of educational content is huge, and we have to consider that. And as they become more confident, then they can figure out how they're going to maintain control of the situation. One of the worst things in the world is to try to figure out how you're going to solve a problem without losing control of it. How much risk is there? How are they going to, control the situation and make sure it's a successful outcome, when they install the solution? How are they going to control user adoption? How are they going to control whatever it is that goes with the solution that you're selling? So you have to figure out how to give them that sense of control with your content. And then I mentioned this when I was talking about delivering takeaways, conversations. Buyers need to talk to each other. They're going to do it in the hallways. They're going to do it in meetings. They're going to do it over lunch, whatever. But you have to figure out how to share ideas that are worthy of inspiring conversations about how you're going to solve the problem. And getting your ideas used in those conversations is what keeps you top of mind. It's not sending an email with a logo that lands in their inbox and you think because they've seen it when the time comes they're going to call you. No, getting your ideas into their conversation is what is going to keep their interest alive and their engagement with your company alive. And that is also what is going to cause them to take action, the action that you want them to take, which is next steps towards buying, requesting that conversation with a salesperson, and those kinds of things. This is all the stuff buyers need to get from your content and how it all fits together. Right? Next slide, please. So now we're up to tip 5, which is developing content intentionally. Next slide, please. Now that you've done all this work and you've gotten to know your buyers, right? You've segmented or figured out how you're going to do that, and you've created a content foundation and thought about what your content's going to achieve and those types of things. Now we're going to talk about how we go about developing content intentionally. And remember back on the first slide, one of the biggest challenges marketers have is developing content that actually engages buyers. So here's a really easy way to do it. First of all, you want to think about your content almost as simulated conversations. Okay? So conversations quite often are built around questions and answers, right? When you're talking to somebody, you'll make a comment or ask a question, they'll answer, and that will prompt you to ask the next question or comment back again to them. We need to start thinking about that in the context of content, okay? So there's a back and forth that needs to go on to create this content flow that keeps, not only gets attention, but keeps attention. So what happens is, when you look at early stage buyers and you look at their status quo and you start thinking about their situation, where are they sitting right now? And they could be sitting there saying, why the heck should I care about whatever it is your product does? Why should I care? Well, when you answer that question, that's a piece of content. That's a piece of content that's designed to catch their attention. right, to get them on board and generate interest in their exploration to learning more, And once you answer the question why they should care, and they go, oh, okay, maybe I do care, then they start saying, well, what should I know? What do I need to know about this to actually figure out if it's worth my time to consider or not, or if it would actually work? What should I know? And your answer to that is also content, okay? What will happen if I don't change? If I just stay in status quo and do nothing, what will happen? So there's content that's an answer to that, right? Because the problem has to be worth solving, or else you really don't have a buying situation. So your company developed their product or solution or whatever because it was definitely worthwhile for your customers to solve. So you need to create content that talks about what really is the cost of not solving it. And this can revolve around things like, did you realize that if you solve problem X, you can actually increase efficiency over here, productivity over there, whatever. What are the other things they're going to get? What are they giving up by not solving the problem? That's how you answer that question. And then they start thinking about, well, I wonder what, my competitors are doing, and how does this impact my industry, and, what are the trends coming down the pike? And the benefit of sharing information like this is it really establishes you as somebody who's a valuable source of information. Remember that thought leadership thing, right? So you want to start looking at how can you provide more information that helps your prospects think about the big picture as well as just solving that problem. What is the wider impact? Okay, which also goes to the last question you see on the screen, what else could it impact? So for example, if they solve one problem, what else does it affect across the company? Okay, things don't operate in, well, actually they do. There's a lot of silos out there, but generally if you solve one thing, it's going to impact something else or some other department in the company. And those things that it impacts will also tell you who are the influencers in this deal. Because if your buyer is going to buy something that changes their life or their processes or whatever, they are going to have input into that. And the thing about influencers is they may not be able to sign the deal, but if they dig their heels in and say, no way are you doing that to me, you're kind of done. So you got to start thinking about what else could it impact and set your buyer up to be successful so that they're thinking about it. That may not be obvious to them until they actually get farther down the road. So if you're helpful in setting them up to deal with it, then you have a higher chance that they're going to keep coming back to you to get more information because, once again, it's helpful. It's applicable knowledge that they can use, to do better at deciding what to buy and how to solve the problem. Next slide, please. So just to put this in some context for you, let's talk about the way most companies tell stories. The stories they tell are centered quite often on their products and solutions. So they start off by telling their buyers, hey, you need our products. And then they start doing some chest thumping and saying, we're the leading provider of. And I'll bet you a majority of you, if you go look at your About Us page on your website or the About Us paragraph at the bottom of a press release, it has the name of your company, and then it says the leading provider of. Well, seriously, how many leading providers can there possibly be? So we need to start thinking about how do we differentiate ourselves and talk about our companies a little differently, right? So we've now told them you need our products, we're the leading provider of, and then we say, oh, look at all our feeds and speeds, our features, look at all the stuff you can do. And then they download a white paper, they take an action that shows you that they might be interested, and we jump the gun and say, oh my God, you looked, you want to buy. Let's have a salesperson call them right away, And then when they don't respond to that, we tend to say, hey, look, we're great. We've got awards. We've been recognized for being terrific, and then we get frustrated because they don't do what we want them to do. And we start in with that fear, uncertainty, and doubt message and start telling them, you're going to perish without us, right? If you don't buy our solution, bad things are going to happen to you. And then when we get right up against the end of the quarter or the end of the reporting period, we start dealing with price and say, oh, we can beat that price. Come buy from us. And this is it's just a self-defeating story. Next slide, please. And so what we want to do, really, since we're now responsible as marketers for educating and engaging buyers, almost to the total end of their buying process, we need to start thinking about the story from the buyer's perspective. We need to begin with the buyer, right? We need to, and this is what we've been talking about here today, is how do they become aware of the problem, and what's causing the pain to escalate, and then your buyer starts seeking resolution, hopefully through your content, because you're helping them out through this whole thing. And then they're going to encounter obstacles like those influencers we talked about that could derail the deal, right? And as they search for more information, they become more engaged with your thought leadership content. They recognize that they've found the expertise that they need, right? So then they decide that they're going to use your solution to overcome their challenges, and they actually solve the problem with your help, and the buyer is the hero of the story, at the end of the day. And so these are the kinds of stories we need to tell. Do you notice the difference in the story? The tone, the style, the engagement level is much stronger, because stories are engaging, but it's also all about them. It's helpful to them. It's not about you. They care about them, themselves. They care about solving their problems, and so we need to really start focusing on what kind of story are we telling over time as we engage with buyers over this longer course of time, rather than turning them over to sales to establish the relationship in the beginning. It's something that takes some time and some experience, and it's something that you're not going to get perfect the first shot out of the door, but you need to start working on what is the story you're telling? How do you really refine and tune it and make it better? Next slide, please. And once again, not to beat a dead horse, but the more you know about your buyers, the better off you're going to be able to identify the questions that they have and to get their attention and keep it. And so once you've figured out how you're going to go about telling a story, I recommend you create a storyboard. And what you see here is a simplified version, but it's got the questions that your buyers might have on the left, and these questions are going to vary based on what your company sells, who your target market is, and those kinds of things. But the basic gist of them, the ideas behind these questions, address the early stages. So you want to think about it in that context. And then the answer is actually the content that you're going to develop, and then you label buying stages as you go. And so, for example, when you're developing a storyboard, what you want to do with your answer is get the premise down. What do you want it to tell them? What are 3 points that your content's going to make? If you get much more than that, unless it's a list piece or something like that, it's going to be too much to digest. And I want you to, this is kind of a key point, I want you to really think about this. We think about things as human beings, we think about things in threes, okay? Beginning, middle, end, morning, noon, and night, walk, crawl, run. We think about things in threes. If we get more than threes, it's hard to remember things, and you want people to remember your ideas. So one of the best ways to do that is focus on making 3 solid points in a piece of content. If it's longer than that, for example, a white paper, think about 3 sections with sub-things underneath them. But just think about what's a way you can create for them to actually retain 3 things. Now, if it's a short piece of content like a blog post, maybe you want them to get 1 idea. So think about it in different layers. But when you're answering the question, why should I care, think about how they can, for example, the answer here is get more mileage from your existing investment in whatever it is. So if it's an IT sale, or an infrastructure sale, one of the things that horrifies companies is having to do a major rip and replace. Well, how can you help them get more mileage from something and do an incremental replace, that they can afford over time without a huge capital investment? What do they need to know? Think about how can you share with them how they can accomplish whatever something is in 3 simple steps. Whatever your product enables or whatever. Think about things that are really useful for them. And so the other thing the point that I want to make, in addition to this idea of 3s, is that I came across a test that was done out on Ann Holland's site, which Test 1. I don't know if all of you are familiar with that site, but it's a great site, and they do tests about, which content or which email or which whatever wins the test. And so what they did was there was a company that put up a negative version of a landing page, and a positive version. Okay, so positive content versus negative content. So it's like why you're going to perish without them versus how great you're going to be once you do this. And what they found was that the positive messaging lifted results by 92.7%. That is huge. I've never seen a result like on a test for positive and negative that was that specifically different. But I mean, huge difference. You know, and so think about that. A lot of the content marketing that comes out is we want to tell them how bad stuff's going to be if they don't use our products. But think instead of flipping that and telling them how great it's going to be if they do choose your products. So just think about that from a stylistic sense. And you may want to try your own test. Really, try a piece of negative content versus a piece of positive content and see what the difference is going to be. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about content that works. Back one, please. Content that works is, can you go back? Thank you. Content that works is, you know, everybody asks me all the time, which kind of content works in each stage? And as you can see by the slide, it all can work in different stages. It's really not about the format. It's about, and I say it this way, the content. It's about what's in it and what's going to work. Now, I have found in campaigns that I've done that going from short to long over time works because they'll engage with shorts, something that they, you know, get a little bite of and find something valuable, then they're more willing to invest in long, and long is usually gated. So, you know, they have to build up confidence in order to fill out the form to get the content. Micro is actually like Twitter, you know, things like that. It's very effective in B2B buying. I've gotten a lot of traction by incorporating social media with traditional content marketing. Some of the things we need to think about are how we really hook it all together. So the other thing that I thought was really interesting that IDG Connect found in their research is that buyers are saying that there's too much text content available and that they actually would like to see some audio and video done well, that they can, you know, watch instead of have to read, that they can listen to while commuting, that they can, you know, engage with in different ways. So you'll see under formats, you've got, you know, articles, video, webinar, white papers, case studies, blog posts. There's all different kinds of formats, and so we need to mix it up, and it's all important. You know, a lot of people think that, oh, if I just put a blog up and I write blog posts, then I've done my job with content marketing, and that's not true. You know, we need to create different kinds of content. Now, that's not to say that embedding videos on your blog isn't going to help. Of course it will. So you can offer all kinds of different content through your blog, but just writing a blog post, you know, twice a week or whatever isn't going to do the job. We need to mix it up. People especially want case studies. And I'm not talking about the two-page normal case study that most companies write that says, okay, here's the company, here's a little bit about them, here was their challenge, and okay, a page and a half about our solution. Here's how great we were, here's the different products that they use. I'm talking about a case study that tells a story of, you know, what they needed to solve and how they solved it, and your products are kind of mentioned in the sidebar. Make it about the customer. And here's the kicker with that one. You want it to be a story that you tell that your prospect can actually say, oh, here's a case study on a company like mine. Let's see how they did it. You know, was there an oops in the middle of it that had to be resolved, and how well did the company step up and do that? I mean, put it out there, you know, all the good stuff and the bad stuff, and show them how you solved the problem, right? Because the customer was successful afterwards, and you came in and you were able to overcome something that showed up in the middle of the project. You know, everything doesn't go perfectly, and we all want to present our best face and say it's all perfect all the time, but the reality is we all know it's not. Everybody knows that. So if you share, you know, different obstacles that you've helped customers overcome and things like that, you know, things that were a surprise that we didn't expect to have happen, they're not only going to see you in a better light because of the transparency that you're sharing, but they're also going to start understanding that they can trust you because if something comes up, you've got the expertise to deal with it without it derailing the project, you know, going way over budget, whatever. So you want to share stuff like that. Channels, we need to start thinking really seriously about, channels from an integrated perspective. I mean, there are a lot of companies that I go into work with, and they have email marketing programs on one side, and then there's another team writing a blog somewhere else, and there's yet a third team in charge of the website, and then, oh yeah, whoever's doing the blog has a couple other people that do social media or whatever, but it's all siloed, and these people aren't speaking to each other. And so the blog is putting up blog posts about one idea or solution or whatever it is, and the email nurture program that's going out that week is about something totally different. And so there's no connection anywhere. And so what we want to think about is the concept of see also. You know, if somebody engages, you know, clicks through from the link in the email and engages with an article that you've shared, if they're really interested, what would be logical for them to want to read next? You know, can you link to a blog post? You know, what else can you do? Is there something on your website that they might want to download? Is there a video you can share with them on your YouTube channel or whatever? But we need to start thinking about how does content link together. And here's the deal. Once you engage them in the early stages, the more time you can get them to spend with you, the better off you're going to be, because they're not spending it with a competitor, right? They're spending it with you, which means they think that you have the expertise they need. So we need to start focusing on how do we make all these different channels we're working with work together with all the different formats of content and the different lengths of content. How can we mix it up? Next slide, please. And a lot of us struggle with creating content in volume. And I want to talk about that a little bit. One of the things that I have is what I call the rule of 5. And every time I sit down to create a piece of content, I want to sit down and think about, okay, with this idea, what are 5 different ways I can create content? Can I create 5 pieces of content? Can I create an article and 2 blog posts? And a couple of emails? You know, how do you multiply this out? Because if you're going to do the research in the first place, you know, you can do it all at the same time if you plan for 5 different pieces of content based on that premise or idea. And here's the reason why you need to start thinking about it this way, because repetition is hugely important. It takes anywhere from 7 to 12 repetitions of an idea for it to stick, for it to actually become intuitive, for your buyers to think that way, you know, first, before they think about it a different way. So you need repetition. Now, that doesn't mean you want to send the same article out 5 times. It means you want to approach the idea in 5 different ways, because that repetition will help them think about it from different angles. And people think differently. So one angle may engage somebody one way, and then another angle may actually get that aha, that light bulb moment, like coming at it from a different perspective. But the more repetition that you can include about, you know, that cement these ideas with them, the better off you're going to be. The other thing I want you to think about is overlays. When I sit down and I segment markets and think about different personas and that kind of thing, quite often there are overlays, which means that there are ideas we can write about that you can just create different versions of that piece of content to address different target markets. It doesn't mean you have to do uniquely specific and distinct content for each segment, right? There are ways that you can shift your content and get reuse out of it, repurpose it for a different persona. So think about different ways you can do that. And if you plan your storyboards and you sit down and do that work, what happens is those overlays become obvious. You start seeing patterns and repetition, right? Another way to create content in volume is to think in a series. So let's say you do a series of 7 articles that then at the end can all be wrapped up together and become a white paper. You know, I mean, think about how you get more use out of it and different ways to put it together. So if you use that series of 7 articles as a nurture program, and at the end you package it up as a white paper and you use it for lead gen, you know, or use it as a final touch to put all of those articles together. You know, so start thinking about different ways you can combine things. Maybe your series is an article, a video, a blog post, whatever, but just think about how you distribute things and how they can build together, which brings me to stories. If you start creating your content intentionally around this idea of stories, it will work that way. And it will make sense, and you'll find different ways to combine and use it more effectively. And you'll be creating less of it if you're not, trying to do this one thing at a time, where it just creates more one things at a time. Next slide, please. And finally, I want to wrap this up and just have you think about the secrets to momentum. We talked about connecting content, and we really need to do that. If you're going to create all this dang content, you need to make sure that it addresses people's needs and keeps them engaged by showing them, if you like this, you may also like that. Okay, now that you read this, you may also like this other thing over here. Or if you're not interested in this, here's something you may be interested in, however you want to do it. But we need to start connecting our channels and other things. We've got to remember, as marketers, that we need to do follow-on offers, which is basically this see also thing, but also calls to action. I see so much content out there these days that has, the only call to action it has is call us for a sales, have a sales rep contact me, or call us for a demo, or whatever. In the early stages, they're not interested in that. So we need to think about what calls to action can we provide that will actually get them to take next steps and keep them engaged with our content. Every single piece of content you put out there really should have some kind of a call to action. And we need to also think about, as we're trying to drive this momentum through the pipeline and shorten sales cycles and get prospects to move farther along, we need to really make sure that we're developing content in a way that gives them some way to go have conversations, to go share those ideas. So make them really approachable, and usually the trick to that is really simplify it down to the essence of what's important and get rid of all that jargony stuff that confuses everybody. So I hope today that, next slide please, I hope today that you've I've said something that helps you with the 5 tips for early stage content development, and I'm going to turn it back over to Ron.
Thank you, Ardith. Absolutely phenomenal job. I think if we could hear hear the audience, we would hear applause right now. Of course, that's my opinion, but I do believe that's true. You've done a fantastic job. Before we go into Q&A, and everyone, we only have about probably 5 minutes or so for Q&A, so please submit your questions. I'll get to them as quickly as possible. Before we do that, I just want to give you an idea of what True Influence is about. We are a pay-for-performance B2B lead generation company. In fact, we are the first and only pay-per-click email advertising platform. Now, to move on to Q&A, let me find the first question for Ardith. In fact, let me start with this one. During the course of your presentation, a few people were asking if they could get a copy of your deck. So that's the first question.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. And then next question I'm seeing from Andy. Thank you for your question, Andy. Do you believe in the concept of progressive disclosure of info?
Progressive disclosure of info. Well, I'm not sure I'm interpreting that correctly, but I think another way to say that would be building the story over time. Mm-hmm. So it goes with the Q&A theory. So if you ask a question, until you get the answer to that question, you can't move on to the next thing, right? Mm-hmm. Because there isn't any understanding there to move on to another question. Mm-hmm. So if you progressively disclose information that builds the story, or based on you need to know this first before you can know this other thing over here, then yeah, absolutely. I call it prospect progression in my book.
Great. Thanks again for that question. Let's see who else has a question. Most of the questions are, can we have a copy of the slide? They really enjoyed the presentation. I'm not surprised. Let's see. Any more questions, folks? If you don't have any more questions, we'll begin to wrap this up. So since I'm not seeing more questions, I will go ahead and do that. We do appreciate your participation in this True Influence webinar and invite you to visit trueinfluence.com and leadpackonline.com at any time for a look at what we do, and as well as find out about upcoming events such as this one. Ardith, thank you very much for doing this presentation for us. You did a phenomenal job.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Goodbye, everyone.